I now call Emma Roddick to be followed by Michael Marra. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In 2014, I got to vote for the first time, somewhat unexpectedly, and in a panic, I read every book, blog and briefing that I could find to figure out where my ex should go. And the more I read, the more baffled I was that Scotland had let us go this long, being stuck in an archaic system that is designed not to let us make the changes and the progress that we want to. Since then, I, along with thousands of others, have voted SNP 8 times, in 2 Holyrood, 1 EU, 2 Westminster, 2 Council and 1 by-election, expressing each time my support for independence. And whether or not you agree with my position, it is a matter of democracy and a matter of fact that the SNP has a mandate to bring this question back. If Scotland cannot test the people's will to take decisions into our own hands, this is not a voluntary union. Refusing to allow a vote on something you disagree with is not the behaviour of an equal partner, nor indeed the behaviour of an institution that has any faith in its own arguments. After a shambolic Brexit, 5 Tory Prime Ministers and a multitude of welfare cuts, none of which Scotland voted for, the situation has changed and people have a right to change their minds as well. That we are here with yet another clear electoral mandate to hold a referendum, but unable to because Whitehall says no, is an outrage no matter what your constitutional stance is and how you would vote in that referendum. If there is any morality left in Whitehall, then MPs must know that their anti-democratic, nonsensical and unsustainable stance is immoral and honestly making our case for us. Our voices can't be heard in this union. We often refer to the union being broken, but honestly, this is its design. The union wasn't made to give Scotland its say. Whitehall's stance on a referendum is just the most visible example of how Scotland is treated as standard. This is what happens with employment rights, with energy policy, trade, immigration, equality, universal credit, Brexit, and I could go on. Scotland can vote en masse for SNP MPs who then vote en masse in the Commons, only to be shot down by the government of the day. One thing I think it is worth pointing out in response to criticism so far is I don't want independence for the sake of it. It's not an end in itself. I don't want to move from one bad system to another. I don't want an independent Scotland to treat disabled people the way that successive governments down south have. I want democracy here to be improved for greater community empowerment, more devolution to councils, clearer representation so that people know and understand who is making decisions that affect them. And I believe that independence would pave the way for progressive politics to happen. Independence to me is a means to an end. And in the Highlands and Islands, Whitehall has utterly failed to even begin to replace the EU funding for rural affairs and economic development that we previously enjoyed, leaving us worse off to the tune of nearly £20 million. We are struggling to replace the health and social care, hospitality and agricultural workers who no longer feel welcome thanks to a Brexit we didn't ask for and didn't vote for. Social Security Scotland provides a massive demonstration of how we can do better and be more progressive than Westminster in redistributing wealth and supporting people rather than judging, stigmatising and gatekeeping. With universal credit still being reserved, the contrast is stark to anyone who is so much as glancing at the two systems. Presiding Officer, we don't just have a mandate to deliver an independence referendum. Frankly, at this point, we have a moral duty to, for the sake of democracy and for the sake of the Scottish people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Roddick. I now call Michael Marra to be followed by Michelle Thompson. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Marra.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We debate the Nationalist motion today with schools closed across Scotland in the first national teachers' strike in 40 years. The last offer sanctioned by this government was 7 weeks ago. Our NHS, by the First Minister's account, is in an unprecedented crisis. And this debate is not the priority of people across the North East or across the whole of Scotland. Of course, favouring independence is a perfectly honourable thing to do. And I understand why many Scots, in the face of chaotic incompetence of both their governments, think that any change might be worth it. So let's be clear. There is change coming to Scotland if we choose to vote for it. We can have a more just country without losing our currency, our defence, our markets and a significant share of our budget. We should and can have common cause beyond borders and see our neighbour's child as our own, that all of our ends be bettered together. What is abundantly clear to me as an observer, only an observer, is that those honourable folk who favour independence have been sorely failed by their leadership. Despite the Cabinet Secretary's rhetoric, there is a route to the destination that they seek. Build a case through honest deliberation and careful compromise to allow the prosecution of the argument. Build a coalition of those seeking change. Build a consensus, a settled will of the Scottish people. Make it overwhelming. That is how the case for devolution was made and how it was won. No one can seriously suggest that since 2014, Presiding Officer, that work has been done by those in the positions to do it. So how about proving the case through the successful use of the powers of devolution? Now, that's not my idea. Once upon a time, it was the SNP's strategy of he whose name shall not be spoken. But what a sorrowful disaster that has been. Our precious NHS in chaos, our schools closed, our universities steadily losing their lead, the worst drugs death record in the developed world, 5 times as bad as the rest of the UK under the same drug laws. Long-term sclerotic growth, now recession. Crumbling infrastructure, ferries that do not sail, islands locked off from the economy, our national language under imminent threat. And I will in 1 second, an overwhelming feeling, everywhere you go, that nothing is working as it should. Certainly.
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful to Mr Marra for the intervention. I accept that if the Labour Party win the next UK general election, they'll have a mandate for their constitutional reforms. Why does he think then that if our side of this constitutional debate repeatedly win elections, we are somehow lacking a mandate to implement our own constitutional reforms?
Michael Marra.
I've already set out the means by which that case can be won and it can be prosecuted. It has been done before and it can be done again if you have the will and the ability to do it. Build your case, persuade people and win the politics. That's how devolution was won and the way by which you can pursue it. Instead, Parliament is invited to participate in the grand pretence that this ruling from the Supreme Court was somehow shocking and unexpected. That the First Minister, having marched her faithful troops up the hill for the umpteenth time, is doing anything more than playing to the faithful, keeping the kettle boiling, another wheeze, another tune on the fiddle while Scotland burns. They claim to be opposed to austerity and produce a growth commission promising to cut further and deeper year on year. They write social justice reports backing progressive taxation and then run in election after election on the promise of tax freezes for the middle and upper classes. Always protecting power for the party rather than exercising that power for the people. No thank you. There is a majority. No thank you, sir. There is a majority for change in this country. The further devolution of power out of Westminster into all parts of the UK, 300 economic clusters can be turbocharged for growth by empowering them directly, the abolition of the House of Lords, replacing it with an assembly for the nations and the regions, a government that will clean up politics, bringing an end, Presiding Officer, an end to the years of Tory sleaze and corruption. That's the choice that is now in front of us. The job of this government should be to make Scotland work again.
Thank you, Mr Marra. I now call Michelle